Hey, welcome to the New Breed of Business. My name's Greg. I'm here with the new breed, the tribe that follows Jesus, Yeshua HaMashiach, our Messiah. Um, we are here to talk about and give an update, and then to get into a discussion about all of what's going on, starting with the recent emerging news of this MOU, Memorandum of Understanding for the Iranian peace deal. Is it real? Is it any good? Apparently, it's a 14-point plan. I saw a preview of it on Bloomberg. I don't know how accurate that is, but um, it seemed like reasonable, but pretty open-ended. There's concerns here about Israel and how this will impact Israel. There's concerns about the economic consequence. This is one of the drivers in all of it, which we will get into today. That's why we're calling this the financial economic update. Other things that have taken place this week are the SpaceX IPO. It came out of the box and everyone's excited about it. Everyone's making money on it. All sorts of new billionaires being created, even a trillionaire in Elon Musk. What does it mean? What is this concentration of wealth? Is it good? Is it bad? We'll talk about that. One of the things that's happened is they have now surpassed Amazon, SpaceX as the fifth largest company in the US markets, which pretty much is probably the world. I think it is the fifth largest company now in the world. And it's the largest company that makes no money. In fact, they're losing their shirts in the hopes of AI. And we'll talk about that. Nonetheless, the stock has gone up intraday yesterday, even 60% from where it priced at 135. Is the world gone crazy? It's worth 3 trillion. It briefly was more valuable than Microsoft. So we'll have to dig into that a little bit. Plus, we've got the G7 going on. There's a love fest between President Trump and PM Emmanuel Macron. So we'll talk a little bit about that and an update on Japan. Japan has raised rates one more time up to 1%. They're the most indebted country in the world. They are the largest foreign holder of U.S. treasuries. What does it mean? Their currency is under pressure, sitting at 160 yen to the dollar, which is the intervention zone. So there continue to be a fragile situation there. Plus that and more. So, welcome everybody. Out of these matters, like what do you guys care about? What do you want to talk about? What's your perspective? What's a question? What do you think? And we want to put this into the context of what does God think about all this? He does care about us. He cares about every aspect of our economy. He does not separate himself from the affairs of men. He's not a watchmaker in the distant observation and just letting things go as they will. The scriptures teach us that he cares about us even as he cares about a sparrow, which is a pretty small bird. So, as I say that, the sparrows are right outside here in the backyard. So, yeah, God cares about this. He has a perspective on this. One of the things we put in the write-up, which you can check out, is prophetic YouTuber, young man Troy Black, who we followed for a while, has pretty good reads. We always test prophecy. We don't just believe it on the face. We need two or three witnesses according to scripture. But he prophesied the dispute between Israel and the U.S., Netanyahu and Trump, literally a week or two before apparently this phone call took place. You may have heard about this phone call, but there was some cursing and swearing and some sharp words exchanged. He prophesied this was going to happen, and that God had a purpose in it. So this is why we're talking about these things. What on earth would God have a purpose in that? Well, according to that information, that prophetic understanding, the purpose is so that Israel would not depend on and trust in the United States primarily or alone or what have you. God has a plan and he's going to defend Israel, whether it's with our help or not. It's always a blessing for a nation to help someone else, to help Israel. That's right out of Genesis 12. We wrote a whole paper on it. You could, I'll put that in the write-up too. Does Genesis 12:3 still apply? Yes, we contend it does. And we are living in the days of the prophetic fulfillment of Israel being regathered and the importance of that in the worldwide harvest of souls, Jew and Gentile, and the role of that and the coming together in that. And even now, the economics, of course, impact all this. The situation geopolitically affect all of this. Um, Many things, like, did you know in the Bible? You, many of us here will know this, that Persia, which is Iran, has been involved in all sorts of affairs in the Bible, and starting with Cyrus, he was a Persian. Did you know that? And he was called the Anointed One and helped Israel get reestablished in Jerusalem. That doesn't mean it's all good though, because then they had the Haman issue where uh, Haman's plot to kill the Jews failed, but it was nearly successful. And so there's this whole history. There's the Prince of Persia. Have you ever heard of that? That's a principality and power over the Iranian people. And one of the interesting things that I saw this week was there was a prophetic guy on Sid Roth, whose name is Rich Vera, and he said that he's been prophesying for quite a while now, like this past year, I guess, that when people thought Jeremiah 49 would be fulfilled, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that has to do with Israel and Iran. And there is this promise that God would deal with Iran in Jeremiah 49 and deliver Israel himself. He's been sharing that the Lord told him this was not that time. This time is something different. So that actually fits to what we're seeing now with this kind of crazy peace deal, which is not does not have assurances for Israel's safety, nor did it totally destroy all of Iran. We're kind of on this pause now, and we seem to be entering into more of an economic relationship and enticement to have normal behavior instead of hostage taking terrorist behavior. But who knows, will that work? We could postulate that it probably won't under the regime, but President Trump says the regime has changed. We've killed them all. We've killed the next round, and now we're on a third bunch, so maybe they'll be better. Who knows? But that's part of what we'll talk about is like, is this really the fullness of what Jeremiah 49 speaks of, or is that yet to be fulfilled? This prophetic guy, Rich Vera, has been talking about it. This is not that. It's coming, and God is going to do it more directly with Israel, as opposed to like with the United States' arm of strength only. So I felt that was interesting. But hey, let's open this up now. A lot of stuff here. We have a potpourri, a whole smorgasbord of topics that we can get into before our summer break. Welcome everybody. Who would like to jump in here with a comment or perspective? All right, we've got Lois Petty.
Lois first.
Lois, you're muted. Go ahead.
Just very quick. I've been hearing that from the liberal left here in this country that Netanyahu is dragging our president and our country into war. Israel is leading the charge here, and we're following Israel. Well, I think maybe Trump got tired of hearing that, and so he cut things off with Netanyahu to stop all those accusations that we're just the slave of Israel. So anyway, I think that's been put to death. I haven't heard any more of that lately. That's
Isn't
my
it
only comment.
interesting how the most controversial figures are often the most effective? So we've got President Trump and we've got Prime Minister Netanyahu, and you'd have to say for all of their strengths and weaknesses, they tend to be well defenders of their respective nations, and also they're not shy. They're not, especially the two of them are more protectors. You could call it however you want to describe that but they're definitely not, in the Chamberlain versus um, uh,
Churchill.
Churchill. Thank you, thank you for rescuing me there. In the Churchill comparison there to Chamberlain, these guys are not the on the Chamberlain side.
No.
Sort of the European, the other prevailing views have been, oh, let's just all get along. This is so ridiculous. We just made things worse, and now they're beating us anyway. Like there's just all sorts of pessimism. But yeah, I think who knows what triggered this like we support one another that has been said numerous times, and I think people generally agree to this, that there's been no stronger president for Israel than President Trump. But President Trump is a volatile figure, if nothing else. It's not that he's irrational. I think he's very rational, but he can be purposefully shifting his perspective, position, his almost like that's part of his deal making techniques. And I think for sure, like we've got that, some of that's going on here. He doesn't want to be anyone's puppet, so that's maybe that got to him. But I doubt it. Like I don't think he's really reacted to the liberal press and decided I need to shift course, right? So I think for his own reasons, he's trying to get this deal done, right? So the midterm elections are coming up. He doesn't want the dynamics of war to continue on. He ran on like ending wars and ending endless wars. He's trying to clean it up. Now, the question is, can you? I think that's the trouble. Will it
Um,
work?
I think one of the things that is in play here is Trump was under, I think, an awful lot of pressure from the other Arab states, Saudi Arabia being the key, and the other three or four key ones, to get this over and done with, and that they could deal with. They feel that we've weakened Iran, to the point, and we really have. When people say, "Oh, we Iran's stronger than well, it's ridiculous." We have totally decimated their military and their manufacturing capability to make weapons, particularly missiles. And I think the other countries there are really thinking of the Iranian people, saying, "Hey, we have, there's going to be a catastrophe, and that'll affect all of us. So, get this deal done."
Yeah, I think Saudi Arabia didn't want their infrastructure destroyed through
Oh,
terrorism.
yeah.
And they want to like they in the UAE just want, hey, let's just make some more money here. Like, why do we need to have any more destruction of our own stuff? I think that again, like that's a nice thing to wish for, but what's the reality of the snake of Iran in terms of this regime? But the people of Iran, I think, are beautiful people. That's using Trump's terminology. He likes to use that beautiful word. Uh, and but it's true. But there's two sides of that too, right? People are talking about, well, the Iranian people feel abandoned. They asked for help, and all they got were a bunch of bombs in the sky, and nobody came on the ground to help them. And so that's legitimate. It's not that we would want to put our own blood on the soil, but that's probably what, if you got 50,000 people of your friends and family all got slaughtered in the streets and you wanted help, it's one thing to put a bunker buster bomb in the middle of a mountain in the middle of nowhere. It's another thing to really help the people. What does that mean? So yeah, this is an open-ended thing. It's like, will a rebellion rise up? Well, they have no weapons, so they're like,
There's you just mentioned that weapons. They will be getting weapons. You can rest assured that surreptitiously through the Kurdish areas and other areas, they will be armed. But I think a lot of people, I never heard it mentioned, anybody in their 50s would have fought in the Iraq-Iranian war. And therefore, the senior population of these 80 million people, they're familiar with arms. They just need the arms. And those can be gotten to them, I think, over time. And now that the government has been weakened so much, and it's also not only weakened, it's divided. I think you have the really hard liners who keep on fighting and want to keep on attacking other people, but that's balanced out with more reasonable people, and I think those are the ones Trump is talking about, just because they're looking to save their butts, in this case. But I think the Iranian people, do you think they'll ever forget that these people are hanging people in public squares and have tortured and outright killed 50,000 people in a couple of days? No, they're not going to forget that. And
Yeah,
I think,
but have we forgotten it already? I mean, I just saw the World Cup and Iran is in the World Cup and we're at war with Iran. It's like, how did
I
that
know,
happen? Like, what?
I know, but you notice they
Those
moved them
poor
in and out of
soccer
Mexico
players will
pretty
probably be
fast.
killed if they don't win their games. Or I don't know. They probably who knows what'll happen to them, but it's kind of a crazy dynamic how quickly people forget, which is
Well, I
also
don't think the Iranian people
economic
have
stuff.
forgotten.
Well, certainly if your life is under threat, you're not going to forget. And that's, I think, one of the concerns of the deal is like, are they being left behind? Hopefully they'll be empowered. But the other criticism of this deal, which you have to acknowledge, is the money is going to be attached to, hey, if you behave, we give you some more of your money back, but that money will allow them to rebuild. The time will allow them to rebuild. And so if they want to terrorize people later, we're back to a strengthening problem, right? So anybody,
Well, that's why we really need to know the exact details of the deal.
yeah, we could go through the 14 points of the plan. There's not really any surprise in there. I think it's pretty much been what people thought it was. There's an open question, for example, whether or not Iran will be able to take tolls. Before the situation, there was no such toll taking because it was open waters.
Yeah,
And
it's
right
international
now, the
waters.
MOU is open-ended on that. So it's kind of a one of those to be negotiated deals. Anybody else want to introduce another perspective or have another aspect there that they've been thinking through about the Iranian peace deal?
This is probably is not a fully fleshed out thought, but you know, you have I just know a lot of people are talking about, the war of, Gog and Magog, and how the, it was interesting that Trump kept saying peace and security, peace and security. It was like all over his tweets in the last few days with all of this. And sudden destruction. I mean, us kind of leaving Israel hanging dry.
You
I
want to
think there's
quote for people the scripture you're referring to? I could try to look it up quickly if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
it says, when they say peace and security, sudden
Yeah,
destruction will come upon them.
yeah. Which is in
Uh,
Revelation. Where is that at?
oh man,
Well, I'll look it up
might
for
be
you.
in
Go ahead.
Thessalonians. Um, so, you know, Israel, I've been wondering, okay, if we're handing $300 billion to Iran without knowing all the details, we did that with, Obama did that, left a lot of assets, and a lot of money behind to them, and they were then, able to arm up, be equipped, and most, send quite a few bombs over into Israel. Um, is this going to put Israel in a compromising position? I would think
Yeah,
so. I don't think handing over a bunch of money roots out that, whether it's a faction or not, the mentality of the Iranian, of some of the people in Iran is, death to Israel, death to America. I
right.
just don't think money is going to all of a sudden say, oh yeah, thanks a lot, I think we'll change. I mean, there's been a lot of education down to at the kindergarten level. Um, kind of programming these children that way to be thinking that way. So, you know, we know there's going to be a war according to Revelations in the Valley of Jezreel, um, where all nations will come against Israel, and then
Like that's the culminating war upon
right.
Jesus' return, right?
Yes, correct. Um, could any of this be setting up for that? That's what I've been kind of asking myself again without knowing all the details. So I just that's my
These are
comment.
good questions. Yeah, these are good comments. Good question. By the way, was First Thessalonians 5:3. While people are saying there was peace and security, then sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains comes upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. So, yeah, I think one of the concerns, and this could be a preview because you get types and shadows sometimes before the actual prophetic word is fully fulfilled. People have talked about is President Trump the Antichrist because he's been saying this peace and security. He's making a peace deal. So don't we know that the Antichrist is going to make a peace deal and then desecrate the temple? That's, I think, in Revelation. So people have said that. People have said that Bibi Netanyahu is the Antichrist for similar reasons, for doing the Abraham Accord deals. This has been one of the other concerns is like the Abraham Accord deals. The criticism of the deal is like, well, you're empowering a militant, Islamic nation states in terms of their threat ultimately to Israel. So, like, why would we do that? So there's like two sides to that, right? And if this is the lead up and they are the people, that's really bad. But if it's not the lead up and this is like a preview or this is like a, preview of coming attractions, but also like a situation where it's like an interim lead up 50, 100 years or something, well, then maybe those scriptures don't apply. It's kind of like that earlier scripture I brought up, Jeremiah 49. You guys familiar with that one? That talks about how Iran or Elam in that, I think, scripture is going to be just totally scattered and wiped out. But before they're restored, by the way, because that's also in the Bible. But, is this time that, or is it not? So I don't know if anybody has a perspective on that, but that's kind of an open discussion. How close are we? Where are we in things? Personally, my perspective is that we're not like right there, but the we're in the times and the seasons. Who knows how many years? We're in that 2000 year period from when Jesus ascended, which is 2033. There's people talking about like that 2000 years is really significant. And I think generally I agree with that. Um, if you just look at the timeline of the scriptures, if you've ever looked at that, that's like the 7,000 years, and you get 2,000, 2,000, 2,000 for a total of 6,000. Then the 7,000 year, or in the year, 6,000 to 7,000, you have the millennial period. Some people look at that literally, some people look at that figuratively. Are we generally in the zone? Like, probably. But like how quickly? I remember Bob Jones, who was another prophetic voice, um, mentioned that he had been shown this 100 years ahead for the church. And so he felt, and that was back, we're talking about now 40 years ago. So, back then, it'd be 60 years from now, he was shown like there are all these things that are going to unfold before the Lord's return. So it's not yet, but it's close. So I don't know if anybody has a perspective on that. We can sometimes get into the rabbit hole on this stuff too, which shouldn't drive how we live. We should live as though we would be home with the Lord at any time. But I think there is the times and the seasons we're supposed to know about according to the sons of Issachar, which is what we were praying earlier. And so certainly we see all of these prophetic signs, Israel being regathered, 1948, the nations turning against Israel, the increased persecution of the Jewish people, the not how knowledge will increase all around the earth. That's certainly happening with air travel, the internet, computing power. So we seem to be very much in this setup. The question is like, where are we specifically? Is this peace deal that peace deal, or is this peace deal some other peace deal? I don't know if you've seen, but Netanyahu drew this map where he wants to see an economic corridor where Israel becomes more of a hub. So we might see this develop a little bit, play itself out a little bit further before the final curtain call, if you will, of the 7 years and all of that that's spoken in the various scriptures.
Could I make
Any other?
one point?
Yeah, go for it.
Um, I think there's a distortion in the press. We're not giving Iran $300 billion. No way. That's what the press has said, and they based it on Saudi Arabia made a statement a week or so ago that they'd be willing to invest 300 billion in Iran when the dust settles. So any money
When the
that
nuclear
we're not going to
dust
give them any
settles,
money, we're just going to give them their own money very slowly if they meet certain requirements.
the nuclear dust. Yeah. So I think that it can be semantics. Are we giving them money or are we releasing money that's theirs? Are we like, what are we doing? But
Well, we're
yes, like,
letting them sell oil, which is, and they'll
right.
get
So,
the funds
so
from that.
it's like, it's not as bad maybe as the $2 billion on the tarmac cash money that we dropped off there a few years back. But certainly a development fund is going to like be an incentive, right? And could the development funds be misappropriated? They sure could. And like the releasing of the monies that has never been available to the regime for 50 years, that's going to be part of this incentive plan. Yeah, so it's like we don't know. Like I guess that's we're living in with that uncertainty. It could be disastrous or it could be good if they became more like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, you could make the argument, well, that's worth it. Let's try that. Let's see if they will be enticed with economic benefit and
Well,
gain.
you got to remember the true radicals who have been running the country, even though a lot of them have been killed, in no way will ever give up their religious, crazy beliefs. Um, they'll lie to us, they'll do anything, but they're a small, tiny part. That's the part of the government that all of the countries around there, Saudi Arabia, Israel, wanted to get rid of. And that's why
Yeah.
there was a lot of when Trump paused the actual bombing, a lot of them said, "Oh no, finish the job, please, get rid of these guys."
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why you have JD Vance basically out there promoting this and saying, hey, this is a new generation. Maybe they will change. Maybe they'll become normal like the rest of us and not just
No,
all about death and destruction. So I think that's what they're hoping for. The question is, will that work? And Israel is the most concerned because the criticisms of this deal, and there's been many voices in Israel criticizing the deal, have been, hey, there's nothing in here guaranteeing our security. Hey, there's talk about how we are going to be maybe a part of this Lebanon agreement. Like, we're not going to be a part of that agreement. So it's a little bit of a wide open dynamic right now. All right. Anybody else want to bring something up about Israel and these threats and Iran and the peace deal before we go into the other topics? Anybody else? All right. So, which of these other topics do you guys want to jump into? Bank of Japan, G7, tariffs. I know, Dad, you had sent a note to me about the G7. Did you want to say anything about that?
well, I actually, you'll have to forgive me. I read the article, and the article was about. I can't remember it right now. I'm
It was
sorry.
about tariffs and whether or
No,
not
no, it
the
wasn't so much about tariffs. It was about the impending. What's the right word? I'd have to go back to the article. Um, I'm sorry, I can't remember but it
Well,
was about
it
finances.
had to do with tariffs and the current account deficits. Do you remember
That's
that in
right.
the article?
Yes, that's what it was.
Current account deficits. So are people familiar with what the current account deficit is? It's kind of a wonky technical economic term of trade. Anybody familiar with that? Just briefly, a little explainer if this is helpful. I'm no expert, but my understanding of it is when you are more of a consumer than a manufacturer and exporter, you're consuming imports. What you do is you're using your currency and the currency is leaving the country. And then that has to be in turn financed, creating this deficit. So if I buy $1 billion worth of Chinese tchotchkes, then I have to send China $1 billion of our currency. So someone's got to finance that. And therefore it can become a debt to the nation. So you following so far? So when there is a deficit, a current account deficit, we're importing more than we export, we're buying more than we're selling. It creates this trade imbalance. And you've heard President Trump talking about this in terms of the tariffs. We're doing the tariffs because we have these trade imbalances. We've got to make it more even. China, you need to buy more of our stuff. That's kind of the argument. Now, we're buying their stuff because it's cheap and cheaper than we can make it. And so it's a little bit of a semantics. But one of the issues it creates is like when we're using our currency or any nation's using its currency to buy other people's goods and services, it can create you're like indebted to that nation for your manufacturing, if that makes sense. And that's what the current account deficits are. So the trade regime and the G7 discussion is going to be, hey, Europe, hey, China, not, China's not part of it. Hey, Japan and all these other nations, we are buying more of your stuff than you're buying from us. Let's talk about that. So you might have seen, for example, the forced labor tariffs. Anybody see that? 10 to 12% new tariffs. Forced labor tariffs. Have you heard about that?
No.
All right. So the forced labor tariffs are the idea of like, hey, if you are a manufacturer dumping your stuff into the world markets and you have an unfair competitive advantage because you're making it with forced labor, that's not right. We're going to tariff you until you change your ways. That's what these next level of tariffs are about. That's less of a European issue. It's more of a developing nation issue. It's really a China issue. That's kind of where that it's targeted is this idea of like, hey, we gotta put more tariffs on you guys because you're unfairly competing. We have to buy your stuff because it's cheaper, but we're doing that because you use labor that's not treated fairly. You've heard about fair trade and the idea of labor that's not slave labor and things like this. That's kind of the argument, which is a valid argument. But the problem is that we, the consumers, want to buy the cheap stuff. So we kind of put a blind eye to, oh, okay, well, it's cheaper, but yeah, well, maybe we don't really see what's happening with labor. And I think that's part of this. It's a shared dynamic problem. It's not like a one-way street. It's a yes, for your purposes, a nation creates cheaper goods. It increases your economy. You're bringing in money into your nation, but you're using labor maybe that's child labor, or maybe that it's like, an unfair wage labor, or maybe it's even slave labor for, forcing people to work for free. Is that right? Well, is it right to buy it? So this is where those kind of arguments come in. That's a little bit of what's going on the G7 is like it seems to be a bit of a love fest. I don't know if you've seen all I put the picture in there of Macron like giving the bro shake and like the double shake and with President Trump. There seems to
I
be a little
bro.
bit of like a celebrity co-love there between them. But you notice how France has changed their tune and they are now loving this deal that President Trump is creating with the with Iran. They are even willing to clear the mines out. I don't know if you read that. They're willing to clean out the mines with I think it's France and another nation, the UK, are going
Yeah,
to
they
clear
have
out the
the ability.
mines because they need the oil. Like that's the main person who buys all this oil from the Middle East is Europe and China. So they need it. And they're happy to maybe do that for those reasons. Anyway, that's why Macron was like, "Hey, President Trump, you're the best. We love this deal. You're the deal maker. You're the peacemaker." So that's a little bit of the bromance that's going on there. Anybody else want to anything talk about there on the G7? All
Only
right,
that
go
only
ahead.
that the European part of the G7, I think, was really disgraceful that they weren't willing to help, with the situation of the Straits of Hormuz.
Right, the fickleness of Europe and the political fickleness, the Chamberlain-esque perspective rather than the Churchillian. Gotta love that word, Churchillian aspects.
Is that a pepper?
Churchillian, dear friend of mine is up in heaven. Used to talk about the going Churchillian on people. All right, so yeah, anything else? Like another part, I'll just go into this briefly. I don't know if anybody wants to talk about this, but Bank of Japan raised rates again. Why is that newsworthy? Well, they're raising rates because they have the runway economically and with inflation to do so. So their inflation has gone up. If you remember, Japan has been in a deflationary period for like 40 years
Hmm.
from their market just getting wiped out. They were like the most valuable stock market in some measures in the world in the 80s, and then it all blew up. So for 40 years, they've been in this wilderness. They've been in a contracting economy. Their demographics, with less people being born, contributes to that. Wages have gone down, like prices have gone down. That's a deflationary environment. So it's very hard on your economy in deflationary environments. So when Japan raised rates like 20 years ago, it was very much premature because they were still in this deflationary problem. And by raising rates, you make the problem worse. So that disrupted the markets back then. And the question is, will the markets get disrupted again now that they're raising rates aggressively? And you've even seen the long-term rates, long bonds all around the world have gone way up. Not only the US 10-year Treasury, 30-year Treasury, the UK's bonds have gone up, Japan's bonds have gone up. Everyone's got credit problems. UK's got credit problems. If you may remember, that's why Liz Truss got booted out because the bond market went bananas in her economic plan, and meaning bananas in a bad way, and basically their bonds sold off. So if a country can't, create more debt because no one wants to buy it and the interest rates are too high, the game of musical chairs stops. So you're familiar with that analogy, right? Musical chairs, like the music goes around and around. Everything's fine till the music stops, and then there's only a few seats. And if you don't get one of the seats, you're out. So that's the dynamic we have with Japan and the UK and other nations that are highly indebted. Even our nation is at risk. We have the largest absolute uh, debt in the world. But anyhow, the Japan raising the rates to 1% is because that inflation, which is not a good thing, has allowed them to increase rates. So when rates go up, that's used as a way of combating inflation. The classic example of that is Paul Volcker during the President Carter administration, which was our last oil crisis, by the way. That triggered this incredible inflation, 20%. And so they had to put interest rates at 20%. to deal with that. So just think of it that way. Like when inflation gets real bad, you have to increase your interest a huge amount, which becomes super expensive to finance your debt. In fact, if it went to 20% today, it would be unaffordable and we would be broke as the United States, if you want to think about it that way.
Is the reason for that, Greg, that when they raise interest rates, nobody borrows money and the economy slows down, right?
The reason for that is because you have to tamp down inflation by, yes, turning the spigots off of cheap money and turning on hard money that becomes super expensive. So it kind of clamps down the economy
Yep.
until inflation gets under control. But if you don't do that, which is so you hear, okay, here's another point, right? Another recent thing that happened is President Trump has appointed the next Fed chair, who has been on record, Kevin Warsh is his name. He has been on record many times saying we should lower rates. And that's what President Trump has been saying, lower rates, lower rates. Because everyone wants lower rates. It's cheaper to finance everything. It makes markets go up. The economy will improve. But it always comes at the expense of bubbles, inflation. You overheat things. And then it becomes very bad because the average person doesn't make enough money to live. And so the rich might get richer, the AI bubble might get bigger, but if the common man can't live and survive on a wage, then what do? You're creating a setup for revolutionary war is what you're doing. So anyhow, like the hope is let's lower interest rates and magically inflation will come under control. That's the desire, right? We used to call this under other administrations the Goldilocks theory. Have you ever heard of that? Goldilocks. It was the other Fed chair, Alan Greenspan, presided over the quote Goldilocks era, which was low inflation and growth, lowish interest rates, and lowering interest rates. And that was considered the Goldilocks period. So President Trump wants a Goldilocks. He wants the golden age. He wants the great economy of make America's economy great again. But the problem is you can't do that artificially. It will backfire, right? I think that's this issue in Japan too. So Japan is increasing rates because things are getting more expensive, but that helps them get out of a deflationary economy. But is a inflationary economy good? And the answer is no. So if you go from one to the other, that's bad. And then you have trouble financing your debt, financing your nation. So if these interest rates get out of hand, which they're all going up on the long end of the curve, which is the higher duration debt, that's lasts longer, it's getting much more expensive to borrow. So when a nation has, that has to replace their debt like ours does all the time, and we issue freshly minted 10-year treasuries, they now cost 5% rather than no percent or 1% or wherever it was before. So that becomes 5 times more expensive to run your government if you have a debt, which all of these modern economies have big government debts. Anyhow, that's why it's concerning. When the Bank of Japan raises rates to 1%, they're saying, hey, this is good, wages are going up, inflation's going up, but we'll control it. Right? So it's this they're trying to get their own Goldilocks. But if it doesn't work, then what? How do you fund your nation? I think that these are the overhangs, the dark clouds that hang over the global debt-driven economy is like, when will the uh, check be due? When will we have to pay up for this debt? And that's sort of an open question. So, yeah, anybody else want to jump in on that? Global debt, payment coming due. One of the things we talked about and we have in our write-up, which you can go click onto the website, I'll put the link in this write-up, is the Watch Japan aspect, which has a prophetic perspective to it. The Watch Japan has to do with like, well, let's watch what's happening here because Japan has unfortunately pioneered many economic practices that are probably not good in the long run. One of this has been to buy ETFs. The government is buying, the Bank of Japan is buying ETFs. They're buying their own bonds. They're buying their own, they're eating their own food to try to incentivize others to buy their debt too. And that can be trouble. So you can take a look at all of the things that have led up to this and why that's of concern. I mentioned one of those aspects, which is they're the largest foreign owner of U.S. Treasuries. So if Japan has a problem, what they will probably do is sell our treasuries to fix or deal with their crises and issues. That's one of the reasons, by the way, that the Fed supports other nations and their debts and situations to stabilize things because that would destabilize the whole dollar-based system. All right, so
Could
you can
we
read about that there. Go ahead.
could we just talk about oil and the opening up of the Straits of Hormuz and when we think that'll actually? I mean, it's interesting that the price of oil here, like West Texas crude, which is our benchmark, went from like what 110, now it's like 70 something dollars. But what's you know, the oil that comes out of the Gulf? One, it hasn't been completely cut off because of Saudi Arabia and other countries have these pipelines going across the country um, to whatever that the, the the channel that goes up to the Suez Canal. Um, and a lot of the oil that's been coming out, as Trump said, oh, we're getting 200 ships and all of that stuff. Uh, if they open up the straits, it'll still take 2 or 3 months. There's something like 14, 1,200 ships stuck to get them all out. And that mainly affects, I think, probably China and India and other Asian countries. Um, so here in this country, where we produce a lot of oil, but we also export and import a lot of oil, a lot of refined products, I should say. Do you think we'll get back to like $3 a gallon before the end of summer?
In terms of gas. Yeah, I think that the certainly oil has already come down. It's down 25%, I think, from recent times, like kicking around $100 a barrel. So it's already down considerably. That has to filter down to the refined products. So this takes a while. I don't know if you've ever seen this. Of course, you've seen this. You go to the gas station and it's still $5 a gallon. And they're very slow in how that gets lowered a little bit every day, but maybe not. So there's this big delay built in that creates more profits. All the oil companies are the most profitable they've ever been. Saudi Arabia is making more money now than they ever have. These are kind of these weird side effects of things. We in our oil industry is doing extraordinarily well. And here's a dynamic, a global dynamic that we should pay attention to regarding oil. So we have freely traded oil. When we make refined products such as diesel, and Europe is short both oil and diesel, and they run on it all the time, they just come to our markets and buy our oil. They buy our diesel, which if you're a diesel seller, you love it. This is like great. I've got more demand now than ever. But if you're thinking of it in terms of national security, the problem is all that diesel's flowing over to Europe, and so they're better off, but we're worse off because we're paying the price even though we have all the oil. So it's kind of a strange dynamic. And we put tariffs on, but apparently constitutionally it's impossible to tariff oil leaving the country. Did you know that? So there's actually a constitutional um, prevention of oil being tariffed on the export side.
Hmm.
So that's an asymmetry that we are dealing with. Now, China doesn't have that problem because they just control everything and there's no constitutional law. It's just like we do whatever we want. So one of the things China's done, I don't know if you've seen this, is that they have huge reserves of oil. They import now quite a bit from Russia as well and other sources. They're resourceful, so they like turn down their demand. They just stop buying, and they're basically pretending like being coy, like that doesn't bother us. Whatever happens with Iran, we don't care. And they're doing that because they want to basically project strength and claim we don't need them. And so anyhow, why is that important to know? Like strategically, we're actually still more dependent on the oil issue in some ways than China. For example, did you know that now China, 25% of all their vehicles are electric? That's way
Hmm.
higher than we have. That means they don't need oil to run their cars. Their demand for oil by barrels has gone down 1 million barrels per day, just because of their EV proliferation. Then you might say, well, don't they have to use the oil to make electricity? No, they don't. They rely almost 60 to 70% on coal, and then the rest, solar, wind, and they've got huge arrays over square miles, square kilometers worth of empty fields in their nation. They have no need for oil for electricity, none. So that's interesting. So they've been able to mitigate their oil demand, and this has now become a thing. So in the way Saudi Arabia could mitigate how much oil they generate, like as the OPEC, the lead producer of OPEC, like, oh well, we'll turn up the spigot, we'll turn down the spigot. China now is trying to position themselves as we can turn off our demand. We don't need your oil. Now they do, but they're playing a way of how they can get away with that. So while we're more dependent on oil, even as we generate more oil, they are less. That's strategically important to China. They created the deal with Russia. What do they call it? They call it the lasting deal, the always deal, the will always be allies deal. I forget what the name of it is. But one of the things they got from that was like a dedicated oil supply from Russia. So even as we're becoming more dependent on a dynamic like the Straits of Hormuz, even indirectly, because it's not the physical oil we need, it's the price problem. That's what's causing us pain. But yeah, so there's a lot of dynamics that are running around. And back to your original question, like, will it go down? Probably will. The also the economy globally is very resilient. So what they found out was even though 20% of oil was flowing through the straits before the war, they've now found that oil has gone in other directions, whether it's the pipelines over to the Red Sea or the other side of Oman from UAE, or ships are sneaking it out, or it's coming from other sources, or demand's being destroyed. That's another thing that happens. Like when oil becomes expensive, demand gets destroyed, so the demand goes down. So all that's like very elastic and flexing, and that's one of the reasons why you may have heard like, well, oil could have been $200 a barrel. It's only 100. So I think, yeah, the net answer is it's highlighting a strategic vulnerability of the capitalistic economies or of the free economies, we'll say, both in Europe and in the US. Even though we generate all this oil, we're vulnerable because of the pricing, because of inflation. Inflation creates the debt problem, right? So if we get more inflation because we're vulnerable to pricing, China can still win because we have this gigantic, they have debts too, but there's other ways they're dealing with their debt. And so it's a bit of an overhang. And so we are vulnerable for further disruptions later, even if this deal like helps the oil price go down now. So obviously that's a political incentive for the elections. Let's get the oil down. If you notice, gas is always cheaper before elections. Gee, how did that happen? So we're going to see some of that for sure. That will help lower inflation issues. But one of the problems is inflation has been persistent even wherever gas has been. So the target of the Fed and in the fiat currency is 2% inflation, but it's really been more like 3%. So that's 50% higher. And that's a problem. That's creating one of the problems on the debt side with inflation. So yeah, it's probably going to go down, but that doesn't mean our vulnerabilities will go down. We still are vulnerable. We're especially vulnerable to Taiwan going into the hands of China. China could make a move. There's some prophecy out there. If you look at Troy Black stuff, China could make a move on Taiwan even next year. We'd have lower munitions. We've had spent a lot during this war. We're still vulnerable to the chips. Our trucks will stop being made. Our cars will stop being made if Taiwan gets taken over. So this is a real issue. It's a real vulnerability. And Eric was talking about earlier, hey, what about this Gog Magog alignment that we're seeing, which certainly
Mm.
is right. We've got the Islamic nations that are militant aligned with communist nations. So we've got communism and aspects of Islam that are combining. That's the Iran axis with China, North Korea, Russia versus the free countries, so that's still there. In fact, like with this deal, it doesn't like eliminate Iran. They still have their proxy threats potentially, so there's vulnerability for sure, like globally still. It's very much an issue. Anybody else want to share anything before we wrap the discussion up or have another point?
In addition to like just gas prices, oil also affects almost every other part of the economy, whether it's transportation, fertilizer, the whole manufacturing world, like plastic is all made from petrochemicals. Um, and so it really affects, if the price comes down slowly, it'll take a long time to get through, let's say, I think the upcoming midterm elections, the pocketbook issues are going to be basically four things in my mind. You're going to have the price of gas. You're going to have the price of food at the grocery stores. You're going to have the cost of insurance. And there was one other thing too, electricity costs. Yeah, so you got four things: electricity, insurance, food, and gas. And if those are all sky high, it's going to be very difficult for the Republicans.
Yeah, that's one of the problems with oil in general and price of oil is it affects all four of those categories, even indirectly. So, like, say
Mm.
insurance. Why is insurance going up? Well, because cars are going up in expense, because houses are more costly to build. Why? Because the materials are more expensive. Why? Because the inputs, like you say, a lot of the inputs, asphalt roof, where does it come from? Comes from the oil. Asphalt driveway, where does it come from? The lumber. How do you get all that lumber from Maine to the lumber yard to the builder? Well, you got to pay for the gas to get it there. So all those categories, food, same thing. Like a lot of our food is imported. There's transportation costs; those have gone up with greater expense and global supply disruption. Just you got to feed the animals, you got to fertilize the fields, all that those inputs. So people talk about how oil and energy is just a component of inflation that actually is extracted from the CPI of the what's called the core CPI because it's very volatile, goes up and down all the time. It's while it's volatile and gets extracted from the core, it leaks over time into the core. And so that's a little bit of this dynamic we're in. So probably we're going to wrestle with this inflation is my guess. My guess would be it's going to be persistent at 3%, not 2%, and then that will impact the other hopes and plans and dreams of the golden economy and age and all that. Because that's kind of a pretend expansion. If we get expansion, but we create a bubble, and we run the economy hot, but it's just generating more inflation, that's actually not healthy. That'll just blow up, and then we could, even if it's bad enough, we'll get like Japan, which is what happens when you get too hot for too long. So this is one of the risks, I think, coming up here. All right. Anybody else? Anybody like to close us in prayer today? Well, Father, we just thank you for this time, for this gathering together. We keep our eyes fixed on you. We know what you taught us, which is to be anxious for nothing. That no matter what's happening in the world, you have it as part of your plan. That your ultimate expression of returning to rule and judge the earth is our anticipation and our prayer and expectation. So thank you for helping us through, Lord. Thank you for getting us to the other side of these things, even unto heaven. We live our lives our every day for you, and our needs are supplied by you, whether we have money or we don't, whether oil is expensive or it's not, whether we have oil or we don't. You can make a way. You even made a way for Israel in the desert for 40 years. That's just one small example. You made the whole earth from nothing. So we thank you and we trust you in Jesus' name. Amen.
In Jesus' name.
God
Thank
bless
you
you
very
guys. Thank you for being a part. See you soon.
As usual, I learned a lot.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg.
You're welcome.